Well, welcome everyone to our fireside chat, which is called First Principles Thinking, Grounding AI and Ad Testing in What Actually Matters. Pretty juicy. I am Abigail Posner. I am both the moderator of the session, but I'm also a brand, marketing, and tech executive. And I'm here with James Slezak, who is the founder and CEO of Swayable. Thank you all for coming. It's so wonderful to see some old faces, not that you're old, but old to me, old faces and new faces too. And so I really welcome us meeting those of whom I don't know later on at our lounge, and we'll give you all the details about that. So thank you for coming. Okay, James.
All right.
I have a confession to make. You ready? Okay. I had spent many decades, and yes, I'm old, that's not my confession, but I have spent many decades in the creative ad industry, either as a brand strategist in the creative advertising space or at Google. I spent many years in the creative space there, most recently as the director of US Creative Works. And my confession is that I have always found creative testing or creative effectiveness approaches or creative evaluation, whatever you want to call it, as a necessary evil. And not necessary for me, but necessary for our clients. But what I'm really excited about today with our conversation is that actually you all at Swayable has made me think about it in a totally new way. In fact, I wouldn't even call, don't get upset at me, okay, but I wouldn't even call Swayable an ad testing or ad effectiveness company. I would call you guys a creative opportunity organization. I hope you like that, and you'll see why. I got a yes in the front. You all can, you can heckle or talk or whatever. And we'll have time for questions at the end too, if you have questions. But I really see that, and I can't wait for us to get into that conversation. So I am going to turn it over to you, James. I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself, and start from the beginning, like your career origin story, because I really think that origin story explains what Swayable is all about and your kind of mission.
All right. Well, I mean, I won't start at the very beginning, but I mean, a lot of Swayable is built around the sort of background that I was bringing to this problem, which is that I was a scientist and I was sweating it out in the labs. It's why I moved to the United States from Australia. You can probably hear the non-New York accent. Yeah,
not
experimental
just any kind of scientist.
Yeah, and a lot of the team actually, certainly the core of the kind of machine learning and computer science and measurement folks have that background. So I did that, but I was always really fascinated by storytelling. I did student newspaper and ultimately wound my way via an agency startup that I worked at called Purpose.com to the New York Times. And New York Times, big stories, trying to figure out how to have an impact on the world. Both the stories themselves and the opinion columns, but also while I was there, colleagues were starting T-Brand studios, and for marketers as well, you're trying to make an impact on how people see brands and products. And I realized that it was very difficult to know if you're actually doing that. Basically, the only way to do that would be a kind of clunky brand lift test that would maybe take a month or two. Other than that, you just had a lot of proxies that really didn't prove much. And so we just sort of went back to the lab, basically, and built a much better way to measure it.
So how do you feel your background as a physicist has helped shape what Swayable is?
Yeah, I think in a lot of ways, it doesn't seem like an obvious through line, but the thing you really learn, especially in experimental physics, is just how important it is to go back to first principles and figure out what it is that you're actually trying to prove and rip apart every assumption you can to, find something out, discover something that wasn't possible to discover with whatever was, the tech that you previously had. And anyone that's been through that has had that as, their apprenticeship. So, with Swayable, the whole question was like, okay, we want to prove if we've changed the public's opinion about something. All right, let's start with that. So what's the best way to figure out their opinion? What are the problems with the current measurement? And when you start to address it the way you would in experimental physics, you can realize pretty quickly there's a lot of points in that to make significant difference to the effectiveness of the measurement, to the point where Swayable now does proof of lift in probably 20 to 30 times faster than what was available before. We do it in 24 hours.
Wow.
With statistical power that really has never been seen before. Thousands of respondents, very carefully quantified confidence intervals, and all that sounds sort of like, okay, the kind of thing that the wonks, who we love and, kind of come from that want, but ultimately it means that you know if the content's working, and you can really trust that when you're deploying these, in some cases, $1 million, multi-million, hundreds of $1 million campaigns, that, that money is going to stories, ads, creative, that's actually doing what the board and the CEO gave the CMO the money for.
Right. Talk to us about the no assumptions concept. Like, what are those assumptions you think we've been making over the years in the ad testing, ad evaluation space that you said, hang on a second, I'm not going to hold on to that assumption, I'm going to start fresh?
Yeah, well, I think, look, the brand lift study, which was pioneered by a bunch of great firms, Kantar and others, really was approaching it the right way. To learn if you've changed something, to really prove that, you want to do a randomized control trial. Meaning you've got a test group, a control group, you do the thing, show the ad to the test group, and you don't do it to the control group.
Right.
And if the thing works, the ad makes me love the brand more, you better find people in that group that love the brand more, otherwise, it didn't work. So I think that was great, but a lot of the assumption there was that you have to couple it together with the actual media plan. In other words, you've got to run the creative in the channel, and then you've got to sort of somehow get all these cats back in the bag. They've all been exposed to the creative. Can we grab a bunch that have been exposed and get them through a survey? And that's actually quite hard, which is why best firms that have been doing this will still take weeks minimum to get it done. And ultimately, the statistics aren't very good because you've lost most of the people exposed. A whole bunch of other ads have been shown in the meantime. Yeah. It's difficult to get them to get through enough questions. So if you kind of ask each of those, if you kind of unpack each of those concerns and put it back together in what we've done, which is a captive survey experiment. So we're focused on the creative, not on the media plan. We're sort of unbundling those two things. Then you can get extremely good stats on whether the creative's working in a controlled environment. And it turns out that that's the best predictor of what it's going to do in the real world, because the stories either work for people that you're trying to reach or they don't.
Right. Isn't another assumption, too, that you have to test every little element of the ad, the color, the font, where the brand, where the logo is, all that kind of stuff. That's not necessarily what you all look for.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think the industry's had a kind of a decade and a half of being trained by fantastic, trillion-dollar companies like the one that you're a key part of, to look at those micro optimization details. But Google and its market cap and Meta, largely they're about the final click. They're about direct response. They're these engines for turning AdWords into a conversion event, and we need that. Ultimately, there's a funnel, and that's at the bottom.
Sure.
But I think anyone there will recognize that it's a little harder to solve the attribution problem. What about all those other touch points, the really big stories, the think different, the just do it? How do we prove the impact of that? That's the 60% of the market that the optimization engines that have been built there are not pointed at.
Right, and I would argue that I think we're finally returning to storytelling.
I think that's right. The pendulum shifted. People got really excited, rightly, about this incredible measurability that was suddenly possible that no one ever had before. People used to track clipped coupons and that kind of thing. That was sort of the equivalent. And then suddenly, these platforms could let you do that. But I think, by becoming enamored with the data and the measurability, some folks began to lose sight of what the majority of marketing is for, at least the spend, which is big stories on billboards, on TV, pre-roll on YouTube. And the goal of that is not to push that final click like the kind of candy bar sitting right at the checkout counter, You need that click eventually, but maybe it's not a click. Maybe it's a muffin that goes into a shopping cart, or it's a vacation that's booked a month later. So most spend is that bigger storytelling.
And so those big ideas also need to be evaluated, or at least in some shape or form examined.
Well, that's right, and the wrong way to examine them is by measuring them with the thing that's easier to measure. So I think that's an assumption people make. It's sort of like, we call it the streetlight fallacy, which is that silly joke that no one ever laughs at, so this won't get a laugh. But it's like, the drunk guy's looking under the light at night for his keys, and the policeman comes over and said, is this where you dropped them? He's like, no, I dropped them over there, but this is where the light's better, right? And I think a lot of the marketing industry is sort of like, well, yeah, no, I'm trying to get brand love, but it's just easier to get a click-through rate optimization, so I'm just, I'll call that performance. Right. Well, it's not performance if that's not your goal. Everyone's seen a clickbaity ad that optimizes for clicks. I used to work at New York Times, and we had a whole team of people running marketing to, optimize red or yellow backgrounds and 40% discounts or 50% discounts. And yeah, you'd get a % or two in click-throughs to subscribe. But we had a new CMO, first CMO that the company ever had come in, David Rubin, and within a month he was running killer upper funnel campaigns, and they tripled the size of the subscriber base. It wasn't from click-through rate optimization on the right background color, to your earlier point. It was that the truth campaign explained what the brand stood for.
And that stuff matters, but we still, as human beings, want to connect, right? And we want to connect to a story that's meaningful. And clearly that, you give space for those brands to evaluate if they are connecting. Share an example of, if you can, you don't have to mention a client, but just share an example of like how you helped a client go from A to B using the methodology that Swayable has.
Yeah, I mean, there's typically different kind of levels of maturity there. I think that the first level, we might work with a brand that's beginning to make investments in its, brand storytelling for the first time. So we had a, pre-launch sake brand that we worked with, actually making AI, generative AI creative, and trying to figure out, is this going to let me launch the brand in a way that's successful with this new market. They were kind of going for folks that are more red state, kind of cookout kind of.
So it was a sake,
Japanese? Sake, it's a new sake brand that they wanted to launch.
Interesting.
And the question was, okay, this is a different kind of consumer that doesn't buy sake. Can we get them to love this idea, love this brand, and want to buy it? And fascinating question, right? Like really blowing a whole new market open that wasn't possible before. So they used the platform to make a series of, in this case, Gen AI ads. With very different concepts. Some were kind of zany with alligators that were sort of animatronic looking, and others
drinking sake. That's
the alligators were drinking sake. Others were like at a cookout. Some characters sort of looked, sort of grizzled, bearded dudes, and others were more sort of polished. And the question is, how do we get people to love this brand? What's going to get this segment to want the product? And it was fascinating. They learned a whole bunch of stuff about how to do the targeting, about how to use the Gen AI. But none of it would have been possible if it was just purely, what got the most likes on Instagram. Right. That's not the metric. The metric is, I want to put this in my cart when I get to the shop. So you've got to measure that.
It's so simple but so profound. Like, how do we get people to love the brand?
Right.
Right. And so, talk about simplicity. There's a famous Leonardo da Vinci quote, which is, "Simplicity is the ultimate sophistication." Right. We may think of simple as something that's basic. But actually, to get to that point of simplicity, you have to be quite sophisticated. You have to have done a lot of work. And clearly, the technology that Swayable has developed is sophisticated but simple by design. I would love, and I really was intrigued when you talked about simplicity over complexity. That's kind of one of your mantras at Swayable. Talk to us about that and how Swayable is simple in a number of ways.
Yeah, I mean, well, my experience on the buying side originally that led me to realize that this problem hadn't been solved properly was that a lot of stuff that we were being sold, this is when I was at the Times, felt like opacity and a little bit like bamboozlement. We got lots of data, so trust us, this is the metric you need.
Very black boxy, yes.
And you ask questions, you don't get answers. You start to hear about proprietariness, and proprietariness and a bunch of stuff that's not actually an answer. And I think, what I took from science, which is not you dress up in a lab coat and throw a lot of data around, it's that you have to have a clear explanation for what you're doing. And so for us, the simplicity is to say, okay, if this campaign, if the brief is about brand love and it's about product consideration, prove that you've been able to lift that metric with thousands of consumers. That's our job. And there's a bunch of other stuff that you can do as well.
Right.
Get feedback, listen to qualitative responses, look at emotions. Great, we'll do that. But at the end of the day, there's a hierarchy of concerns here. And at the top is, well, what was the whole point of this campaign? It was to get people to love the sake brand or feel good about the travel company or, the holiday destination. So, you've got to start with the simple goal of the campaign and make sure that metric's being measured by the platform.
And not 30 different metrics which change over time or change by category or,
I mean, look, there's a lot of ways to kind of get helpful information, and I don't want to sort of be rude in any way about other data offerings and stuff, but I think, you can build scorecards of all kinds of proxy metrics, but like at the end of the day, if you're on the board of a company or you're the CEO, you hand that money to the CMO to make the number go up, which is I love the brand, or some version of that. I associate it with qualities, or, I think it's good value, or I trust it. We work a lot in healthcare. There's safety and efficacy and all kinds of things there. So, that's what the money's for. So, don't turn up with a bunch of proxy metrics that measure something else and then kind of argue that someone has a big data set that proves that the number that really matters is going up. Measure the number that matters.
Sure. And, another thing that was compelling to me about your story and the simplicity of Swayable, as someone who happened to always be on the receiving end of the data, was what you offer in terms of results is a very clear, compelling story that then as a CMO or as a brand strategist or whoever, you can compel your audience, maybe it's your stakeholders or maybe it's the creative director or whomever, to understand and then activate against that data versus like gobbledygook, which sometimes we would get.
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think everyone should ask, what does this data mean? How do I know that it measures the thing that actually defines business success? And increasingly, that's what people are doing. I mean, it used to be in the old days, you just couldn't ask that question. The Mad Men guy with the suit would just say, this is the way to sell this story, you know?
Right.
And I think, you know, kudos to the bottom of the funnel people who sort of prove that you can measure stuff in marketing well, and now that's coming up. But I think, you know, it's both for the creatives and the brands, but also, you know, we work with some killer agencies that really face the same pressures. You know, I was just at South by, we were just talking about it with our great partners at Influential, who've just, you know, rocketed up to become the world's top influencer marketing agency. You know, a part of that story, an important part, we, you know, don't want to overstate our case. They've done incredible work, but, you know, Chris and the team there will say they could prove that their influencer content was moving brand love because of the Swayable pre-testing that they did. And they hand that to the brands, and the brands are like, great, I'm moving more and more of my marketing over to what you're doing. I need to know that it's actually generating more lift and not just audience.
That's really compelling to hear, because as I said before, when I was in the ad business, I just felt like, okay, all my great ideas are going to get killed by the ad testing space, right? And that they were just going to go to the cutting room floor. So to be able to give creative thinkers a way forward, like armor, to actually take those great ideas and activate against them, even if they're seemingly risky or seemingly different. Now you have a way to bolster great ideas.
Yeah, I think this is a really critical piece of the use of data. You know, it shouldn't be there to kind of box in creatives because we've got a bunch of historic data that proved that ads that look like this moved some proxy metric that I'm claiming is now the way to predict what will happen in the future.
Right.
You know, you need bold, risk-taking ideas. No one ever came up with an iconic campaign by just sort of checking 17 boxes about where's the logo positioned in the, you know, in the ad. I mean, and again, not to disparage what are, you know, relevant best practices and things like that. The way to prove that the idea works is to actually take thousands of consumers and lift their love for the brand and prove that you've done that. So, you know, one of the most exciting things for us, I think, is, you know, when you describe this kind of testing as maybe, you know, previously felt like a necessary evil, is to kind of flip the script on that, where, you know, you work with creatives that are like, actually, this crazy idea that everyone else in this room thought was never going to work, I proved it works with this data, you know?
How awesome is it to have creative directors running towards you and,
and
not away from you, right?
Honestly, the two things are just, you know, the people around them can trust the results, and number two, you get it in 24 hours. So, you know, when it comes 2 months later...
So you can always iterate. You can iterate, get better, and keep testing back and forth.
If it's 2 months later, it's someone grading your homework exercise from 2 months ago, and that's...
And you're on to the next idea.
Yeah, exactly. So, you're off the, you know, did it work, did it not work, what can I do about it? Not much.
Exactly. You know, if anyone knows me in the audience, they know that I am super passionate about the confluence of technology and humanity. I studied social anthropology, and I have taken that passion for understanding human beings into everything I've done, whether it's understanding culture, brands, advertising, leadership, and certainly technology. And I'm a big believer in, if used right, technology doesn't just help humanity, it can actually elevate humanity and really kind of, you know, be human first. And so one of the other things I really found compelling about Swayable is that you share that same attitude. And maybe that's because of your background with purpose and with the New York Times about elevating humanity and the opportunity for marketing to do that. Talk to us about how Swayable is human first.
Yeah, well, look, there's a lot of really interesting debate about how to, you know, use, for example, artificial intelligence to make better measurements and to learn how to do creative better. And our position on that has always been that it's a way to get at insights about real consumers more easily. It's not a way to kind of say, hey, the machine replaces the consumer in this process. So our measurements are always measurements on real consumers, but where the AI layers of automation are doing just incredible things in a whole bunch of areas. I mean, you know, I won't sort of rattle off the whole roadmap, but you know, from the very beginning, being able to just look at what tens of thousands of consumers have told you, you know, extra efficiency that you can get from not having to spend a day reading through 10,000 qualitative comments, but have AI summaries, have now top-line memos, executive summaries, syntheses written for executives that previously took a marketing analyst or a professional a day to write, but having them delivered instantly, it's kind of blowing people's minds away because the experiment can be done really well and you can get it in 24 hours. But now if you've got all this data, you've got to look through. Often the pain point that people would tell us is, now I've got to look at all the results and figure out what the story is here. So, AI being able to generate those sort of first draft decks and storylines in memos has been tremendously exciting. And then the frontier for us, which we're incredibly proud of, is the AI analysis factory, which is answering all those questions that previously took a PhD data scientist to kind of follow up a week later with. The measurement in the platform tells you one thing, but often, especially for large deployments, there's some unanticipated question. If you correlate this result with one from a week ago, or what if I look at this segment and I combine them with that segment, and that's never something that you have built an entire product around.
Right.
But now, instead of typing that message to Mike Bomber, the head of data science at Swayable, you can type it straight into AI Analysis Factory.
Very
and
cool.
it sits there building code, drawing charts, analyzing things, checking them, which turns out to be the main development to make sure that you can trust what you get out. And then suddenly, the New York Times uses this actually. They've been testing, well, I shouldn't say too much about what they're testing, but testing some of their products and services and looking at their competitive positioning. But how do they stack up against other offerings in a particular market that they're in, and what characteristics are shared or not. It's been amazing to just see that pop out in minutes instead of weeks.
But at your core, going back to simplicity, right? At your core, you are asking human beings to respond as to how they feel about an ad.
That's right.
It's not kind of crazy behaviors or how the eyeball tracks or whatever. It is
exactly.
Just like, how do people respond?
Yeah, I mean, Google used to have a unofficial motto, "Don't be evil," and our unofficial model is "Don't bullshit people." So, we want to know what you think about the brand and the product, it turns out that you can put as many fancy devices and probes on people or track whatever you want to track about them. But if the question is, does this person prefer, New Balance or Nike, or do they want to go to Iceland or Costa Rica for a vacation? The number one tech in 2025 is you walk up to them, you ask them a question. You say, do you like Nikes or do you like New Balance? No probe in your head or your eyeballs comes close to that, no matter what sort of backtesting proxy claims people have to make.
And I pushed you on this because I said, what some people say versus what some people do really is different. But you had a good comeback from it.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely right. I mean, the job for people doing measurement is to get the best possible measurement. And it's absolutely right. If you get 10,000 people, does somebody say they like New Balance, but really they like Nike? You bet. Right. But firstly, you can quantify exactly how many people don't give you the right answer, and it's very manageable. But second, if you're doing a randomized controlled trial study, just to get technical for 1 second, it turns out that inherent in that design of an experiment really controls for that problem, because you've got a control group and you've got a test group. And if you just imagined even that 10% of people were saying the wrong answer, well, you've got 10% of people in the control group and the test group. So the whole design of the experiment cancels that out. Right. What you're looking for is extra people that love the New Balance or the holiday in Costa Rica. And that is a very robust design. Right. Yeah, it's the reason why if you do a social, we make efforts to collaborate with a lot of academics, and we publish peer-reviewed social science articles, and that you can publish, that proves something.
Yeah.
Because the RCT design is an extremely robust way to prove something.
I love that connection point between science and kind of real human interaction. It's kind of, you're bringing both of them together.
Yeah, what's your background?
Yeah, right. Now, this convo is a great segue to my next question. This is not your first time on the Ad Week stage.
That's true.
It's very important for you to talk about Swayable and what you do. Why does it matter so much, really? I mean, let's get down to the nitty-gritty.
Yeah, I mean, I think, the logo for Ad Week for me always sort of, says it. Basically, this is an industry that's telling big stories, and the role of the storyteller is a critical role. I mean, it's why I worked at the Times. It's why, I've been involved in campaigns. But ultimately, it's about changing what's in your mind. That's the storyteller's there to make a difference to how you see the world, see an issue or a product or brand. And that kind of work is critical. And, look, not every story is about the world ending or climate change, and we do a lot of work on that. Some of it's about what muffin are you going to buy. But, those stories are what drive the long-term growth of these organizations and these large businesses. So, their health and their continued prosperity, depends on that work being successful. Sure. And I think, we want to play a support role as data folks that kind of hold the creatives up as the heroes of this, and give them the evidence that what they're doing is working.
And I remember when you and I first got together and we started talking about all of this, and we said, imagine a world where everybody was a better communicator. Just full stop, right? Like whether it's about a brand or about a product or to your spouse or about an issue, right? And so if we can all just get smarter, more comfortable, more inspired by being a better, clearer, more elevated communicator, who knows what could happen?
No, that's right. And inherent in the nature of communicating is you're talking to folks who maybe have less familiarity with what you're saying. And we do an enormous amount of work with our nonprofit clients as well. And it's always a very kind of, validating moment when, I had a dinner next to somebody we work at for the Brennan Center for Justice, and she had an op-ed that she had just drafted for, one of the critical issues that they work on around democracy and, the rights of folks in society. And she said, I've changed that op-ed because we run a bunch of Swayable tests, and I realized that when I tell this story about the importance of democracy like this, it moves people. And, her whole career is that, so it's difficult for her to imagine someone on the other side of that op-ed. So, communicating effectively is critical if we're going to succeed.
And meaningfully, right?
And meaningfully.
Yeah. So as you think about the future of Swayable, or the future of James, like what, give us kind of a vision of the future state.
Yeah, I mean, we really believe that ultimately, this industry will change dramatically because, we're already seeing a dramatic disaggregation of the channels. It used to be you had the newspaper on the desk and you had the TV screen in front of you. You've now got a million different channels. And I think we're seeing similar things happening to the actual industry of storytelling with content creators and influencers and their rise as well. But I think that the thing that is left, exactly as you put it, is just being able to tell a better story and know that you've done that. And so, we really believe in a world where people can really instantly understand that, continually get better at it. And where, as a result, we're not wasting time as the storytellers and the media planners, but also as the consumers and the people on the other side of the stories. We're not being bombarded with stuff that is either irrelevant or isn't, helpful, isn't having an impact. I want to see stories as a consumer that actually have an impact on me, and better to have fewer that are working well than just being bombarded with stuff that doesn't work. So
let's help the community at large tell a simple, meaningful, effective story about anything.
Exactly. Everyone wins.
Yeah. We only have a minute and a half left, so we have about time for one or two questions. But if we don't get to your questions, we have a lounge at the second level leadership zone. So feel free to come. We're going to be talking a bit more. So you can ask your questions if you are still kind of pondering as to what to ask. But if there's anybody who has a question in the audience, please feel free.
James, thank you so much. Thanks, Abigail. My question is, so you spoke about analysis factory, right, that you have at Swayable. What if there was like a creative factory, so where like the creators would need to run to you, as Abigail was saying, but everything would be done within the platform to optimize the creative and to tell a better story?
I love that. I think we're very close to that future. I mean, hopefully that supports the creatives and gives them ways to come up with bigger ideas more quickly. But I think coupling that with proof of lift, proof that it works, is a killer idea. And let's just say we have a few people working on something similar.
I love that. You said creative factory. Is that what you called it? Yeah. I
love
know.
It.
It's time to resurrect the creative director and that role, right? I think it's been buried for a while, and I think it's time for us to romance it again.
Yeah.
Because it's important.
And I was just part of what's important about it is, coupling it with actual evidence of stuff that has worked. You can throw together something in Gen AI quite quickly, but does it work or not? The key thing is going to be coupling that with a pool of, high quality results,
Any other questions? Yes, with the woman with the glasses, yes.
All right, so thank you, by the way. So essentially what I'm getting from Swayable is that you help companies and agencies utilize like emotional branding so that they make sure that they are using the correct type of branding or campaigns that work and stick with people, right? So like personalizing it to their consumers.
Yeah, they basically, it's a tech platform. So either agencies or creatives will test whether or not their creative is generating a lift in love for a brand. But it's usually like an ad or an idea for an ad, but it can be branding or positioning as well. Yeah.
Just because I'm a student and I'm learning a lot about like emotional branding at school.
Oh, yeah.
You know what? I'm
important.
so sorry to interrupt you. This is a great question. Bring it up to our lounge, because we have to let you all go. So I didn't mean to interrupt, but I think let's continue the
Good
conversation.
segue.
at the
We're up on
lounge.
the third floor, I think, right?
Is it third
Yeah.
or second floor?
Whatever the top floor is, yeah. Come
Top
and
floor,
have a-
okay.
Have a drink.
Thank you so much
thank
for
you,
your
Abigail.
attendance.